Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. We're going to look at a game today where it's sort of like one person had a tactic that involved a couple of motifs and missed it, and a few moves later, his opponent had a similar tactic on a different part of the board, and he saw it, and that was the whole difference in the game. Sometimes it's just how you play in the critical situations that makes all the difference. So let's take a look at the game. It's a very interesting King's Indian. Let's see here. White played c4. Starts out as an English. Black plays knight f6, knight c3, g6. Says to white, if you want to play d4, we can play a Grunfeld or a King's Indian. If you play something else, we could stay in an English. White decides, sure, go ahead. Play a Grunfeld, which is d5, or a King's Indian with bishop g7. Black says, let's make it King's Indian. White says, all right, main line of King's Indian, e4. Black plays d6. Now the main line, if you saw my earlier video on the tabia of the King's Indian, the main line is bishop e2 or knight f3. It usually transposes. Castle, knight f3, e5, castle, knight c6, d5, knight e7. That's the tabia position. The main move that's being played these days is knight e1, knight d7, knight d7, bishop e3, f5, f3, f4, bishop f2, g5. And things start to diverge from here. All right, so back to the game. In the game, Black played the normal move, but White played bishop to d3, which is the Soltis variation. I don't think White purposely knew it was the Soltis variation. He probably thought that was a main move. I know the player who was playing White, and he's not a really big bookie player, so I'm assuming he just is kind of winging this. So Black castles, and White plays bishop g5. And now he's got a two-way bishop on g5. It has pressure along the h4 to d8 diagonal, because if Black pushes the e-pawn, like normally happens in a King's Indian, then he has a pin. And he also has pressure on the c1 to h6 diagonal. So what Black should do is hit that bishop with h6 sooner rather than later to say to the bishop, sure, you want to be a good bishop, but I'm not going to let you be good in both diagonals. You're going to let me know which way you want to go. So Black plays h6, and White plays bishop d2. Well, that tells Black that he's willing to keep the pressure up in this way, but he's going to give up on the pressure in this direction. So now Black could break in the center with c5 or e5. Instead, Black plays king h7, which is completely unnecessary. That's kind of a waste of time. You can see up here with the engine, it's not one of the top 3 moves. There's one move in the master database and in this position, and Black played knight to c6. Okay, so Black plays king h7. White now plays h3. Not quite in conjunction with all the rest of the moves here, but White's a fairly aggressive player, and I think he just wants to castle queenside and push his pawns. Black breaks in the center with e5. White plays d5. Okay, so now Black has to decide what to do. He decides to play it like a Petrosian, which this resembles a little bit. And he plays a5. The Petrosian variation features an early d5 where Black plays a5 and knight a6 and knight c5. So Black is aware of that idea and plays a5. And White plays g4. The idea of g4 is not just to attack the king side, but to play against Black's break move with f5. So Black plays knight a6, and White says, I'm going to advance on the queen side with a3 and b4 and try to knock your knight out of there. White plays a3, Black plays knight c5, White plays bishop c2. Now Black would love to play a4 here, and I think Black probably can play a4. So let's go through that. The idea of a4 is to protect the knight. If you play a4 and White plays b4, you can take en passant, and you isolate the a-pawn and win the bishop pair when he recaptures bishop takes b3. But what happens if he plays knight takes? Well, what you can do is then trade your a-pawn for the e-pawn. What you do is you like take here. We could even take with the rook. If he takes with the bishop, the computer says knight d3 check is practically winning. If king e2, knight takes b2, hits the bishop. All kinds of good things here happening for black. On the other hand, if you're afraid of sacking the exchange there, you could just play knight takes. It's not quite as good, but the idea is the bishop is overworked, and when he gets his piece back, you can play knight takes e4 with a better center for black. So this is a really, really good trick to know. And I don't think black knew about this trick. So a4 right now is the computer's equally best move, but the move that black played in the game, c6, the engine says is just about as good. So c6. It's good to know all these little tricks, though. The more little arrows you have in your quiver, the better you can play, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you play. That's not only true with openings and endgames, but it's true with tactical patterns. Okay, so c6, white plays bishop e3, black plays the best move, c takes d5. C takes d5, and now the engine says black should play b5. Again, with this sort of overworked idea, let's take a look at that. If you play b5, and white says, what are you doing? You're going to give me this pawn. That takes away the defender on the e-pawn, and now you're trading this b-pawn for the e-pawn. Black can play knight c takes e4 with a giant advantage to black. So white really shouldn't take the pawn, but that means black's threatening to remove the guard. Again, all these little tactical ideas are really, really good to know. All right, so black just plays b6. Well, he has the right piece to move, the b-pawn. He just moved it up 1 instead of 2, which is not as good. So white plays knight f3. Black says, let me stop you from castling with bishop a6. And white says, let me try a little trick with bishop h6. Well, it's a trick, but it really doesn't work. Bishop takes h6. And my student who was playing black writes, this is a big positional mistake for white. Black can recapture with the bishop and have strong central control over the dark squares. So he takes. White says, oh, guy, get a fork. In this position, the engine says black should play knight h5. He can always get his pawn back when white takes the bishop. Instead, he plays bishop takes g5 right away, allowing knight takes g5 check. So that's not the most accurate. Just go after these dark squares. After he takes the bishop, you're in no hurry to take this pawn. You could use it as a shield for yourself. You can play knight f4 here. Engine says that even though the material is roughly even, black's positional advantage is huge, and he's up about 3 pawns in the evaluation. All right, so black immediately takes, which is not as good. He's still better, but not as much as he would have been if he played it the other way. Knight takes check. King to g7. Queen to d2. Now black plays knight h5. Right idea, best move. And black's dark square advantage. He's about to play knight f4 and remove the guard on the knight on g5. White finally says, I can castle. Castles queenside. Engine says black should play rook c8 and put his rook on the open file with the king. Or maybe play bishop to c4 and threaten moves like bishop b3 or knight b3 check. He plays knight f4, a reasonable move. White says, well, we're castled opposite sides. Let me blast open the king side. And he plays h4. Again, black should get his pieces in the game. He has lots of ways to do that. He can play bishop c4. He can play b5. He can play queen f6. He plays b5, a good move. Engine now says it's at least equally good, equally best. And white opens up his queen side with b4. Not a great idea. And now black can start to win material here if he plays it correctly. He plays the right first move. He opens up the a file for his rook. And now this pawn is hanging. What do I mean this pawn is hanging? Well, you can just fork the king and the pawn. Well, if you look at this and you say, he can't fork the king and the pawn because he's got too many pieces on it, that's not quite true, because if you play knight fd3 check, first of all, he can't take with the bishop because knight b3 check wins the queen. But if he moves the king, to b1, when he plays knight takes b4, he's taking off the pawn that was attacking his other knight, and he's not only winning a pawn, but white's position is completely falling apart. You can see the engine says that white is about 5 pawns down now. Let's see what would happen with best play on both sides. h5 trying to counterattack. Knight takes c2, getting rid of one of the defenders around the king. Let's say he takes back. Most people are going to take back. Let's say he takes back with, I don't know, the king. b4, opening up this line for the bishop, hitting this poor knight. Engine says the white should give him the knight. Let's pretend he doesn't want to do that. Let's say he tries to save the knight with knight b1. Engine says queen a5 will win, bishop d3 check will win. For instance, bishop d3 check, king to b2, now queen to a5, and you can see already this game is toast. Mate in 9. All right, so what kind of tactic is this? Well, the first part of this tactic is overworked piece. We've got the bishop guarding d3 and b3. If he takes on d3, you go to b3 and you win the queen. The second part of the tactic is the fork, which is if he doesn't take, he can't just ignore you because knight takes b4 wins a pawn and sets up some further tactics. So in this position, I think black just made a counting mistake. He just said, if I put this knight on d3, he's got it guarded 3 times and I only have it guarded once. So that square is guarded more times by white than black is guarding any piece that he puts on there. But if he puts the other knight there, then of course he can take it because there's no fork here. So that's just a blunder. So black missed the idea that white can't initially take with the queen, but he missed the idea that if he takes with the bishop, the knight forks. Now anybody watching this video can say, oh, that's easy to see. But black's not a very weak player, and white's not that weak either. They're both, around, let's say 1500, which for some people would say that's weak. But a lot of people watching the video are even lower than that. And it's very easy when no one's holding up a sign or there's no video telling you, hey, this move is safe. There's a tendency to just look at the safety table and say, if he takes and I take and he takes, I lose a knight, and not realize what the other consequences are. This is one of the differences between people who are 14 or 1500 and people who are 18 or 1900. The 18 or 1900s are not going to make that mistake, or at least they're much, much, much less likely to miss the fact that this is a safe move. So black simply retreats his knight back to d7, and now black's advantage, instead of being up there around the winning level, is right around the borderline between win and draw at about minus 1.3. All right, so white plays rook on d to g1. He's going to blast open with h4 and h5 and open up the king side. Here, black should play the prophylactic move, rook to h8. He could also counterattack with knight b6 and knight c4. Either way, he retains a big advantage. He plays queen c7. The problem with playing queen c7 is you have to watch out because this square is starting to become a forkable square where if black recaptures here, maybe white can temporarily sack the queen and then get it back like that. So you have to start watching out. So white plays h5, and clearly here you can't play knight takes h5. If you don't understand why not, take a minute and try to figure it out. Why is knight takes h5 unsafe? It's not that hard, especially if someone tells you it's not safe. Well, the answer is knight takes h5. Just take it. Rook takes h5. If you said I can't take it because rooks are worth more than knights, that's called a quiescence error. He takes back, and now you play knight e6, double check. And after king h7, you have a pleasant choice. You can just win the queen and he'll resign. Or you can play rook g7 check, king h8, and queen h6 checkmate. Okay, so you can't take the pawn with a knight. Black's good enough to realize he couldn't do that. So he blunders and he plays f6. But what he should have done is keep this pawn here, so that the knight can't come in here. He should have played rook f(c)(8) and counterattacked the knight over here. Once he played f6, then white recognized, oh, I can sacrifice my queen for the knight and get the queen back. So he can basically do to black what black missed doing to white. He can get rid of the removal of the guard to overload that knight, and then get the fork by removing the guard. So queen takes f4, removes the guard. If he doesn't take the queen, let's say he takes the knight instead, then white can just play queen takes g5, and this g6 pawn is a goner. For instance, if queen takes c3, queen takes g6 check, and it's mate on the next move. But suppose black tries to guard it. Suppose he plays rook f6, then pawn takes. If queen takes knight, then queen h6 check, king to g8, queen h8 checkmate. So black's got a problem here. If he takes the queen, then knight checks not only wins the queen, but at the end of getting the queen back, he's up a knight and he's forking the bishop and the rook, so it's an easy win. So black decides to just take the knight and go into a similar line. He does play rook f6. White takes, threatens queen h6 check. Black tries to stop that with rook h8. White just takes the rook to remove the guard and get the checks on the h file. King takes, queen check, and now black resigned. Why? Well, it's not that hard. King here, queen checks, king here. And now there's several ways to win, but the easiest way is to check with the pawn. By the way, if we go back a move, the computer says don't check, play rook h1 and threaten mate in 1, and that's actually the best move. Gets you a mate in 4. If you play queen h7 check, it's only mate in 6 after that move. Mate in 7 if you count queen h7 as the first check. And now check here. If he comes up to the 7th rank, he gets a queen with discovered check, but if he goes back, you get a queen with check. And if he puts something, if he puts the knight in the way, you can take off his other queen and you have 2 queens to 0. If he puts the rook in the way, sneaky pin, queen check, king d8. Now we could sacrifice a queen for a knight and a pawn, a knight and a rook. Takes, check, king up, and rook to g7 is checkmate. So in the actual game, none of that was played. After rook h8, rook takes, king takes, queen h6 check. Black said, things are not looking good here. I think I will resign. So ironically, black basically lost to the same combination that black missed winning earlier in the game. Let's go through the game real quick on fast motion instant replay. Talk about what's good and what's bad. Starts out as in English. Black says, would you like to play King's Indian or Grunfeld? White says, okay. Black says, let's make it King's Indian. Main line. Now, not so main line, bishop d3, sold as variation. Black could just play castle and e5 if he wants. Bishop g5, h6, bishop back. And now king h7, if black's watching this video, hopefully he'll see that move is not necessary unless that h-pawn gets attacked. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. Does not help black at all. White plays h3, e5, d5, a5, okay. g4, interesting counter idea on the king side. Knight a5, a3, knight c5, bishop c2. This is where a4 is a good idea to know because of the overworked white pieces on the e4 square. c6, quite okay move. Bishop e3, pawn takes, b6, white-black could have played b5, again with the overworked pieces on the e4 square. Knight f3, bishop a6, black is better. Bishop h6, starting a combination that wins back the piece but actually ends up as a negative. Pawn up, now black should just play knight h5. Bishop takes, kind of a waste of time. King over, queen d2. Now knight h5, good idea. Castle, knight f4, h4. b5, good idea. b4, very bad idea. Pawn takes, and now we have that knight on f to d3 check, winning the game. Black says, I missed it. Let me read you what Black says. He said, this is a crucial mistake for Black, missing the winning tactic, knight f d3 check. Even placing the knight on a4 and sacrificing the pawn would have led to a winning attack due to Black's ability to jump on the open c-file and check the white king. So that's worth noting. The second best move is to play here, and if White tries to win the pawn with knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, he's opening up all these lines on the queen side. Black doesn't even have to do anything too quickly. He could just play queen to b6. I don't know what's White going to play here. He's in big trouble. Bishop c6 to try to block the line. Knight d3 check. King to b1. The computer says bishop c4 wins, opening up the rook file. This is the kind of position where you're not worried that you lost the pawn. Black's the one with all the attack, and White's the one who's like trying not to get mated. So, you know, when you're castled, a big principle is when you're castled opposite sides, sometimes losing a pawn in front of your opponent's king is a good idea rather than a terrible idea, because it opens up lines for your rooks against his king. And that's what's happening here. You can see the engine has Black up by 8 pawns. So even though Black missed the combination here with knight f d3 check, if he would just play knight to a4, he's also winning pretty easily. His move, knight d7, looks like the only perfectly safe move compared to knight a4 or knight d3 check. But actually the unsafe moves, in quotes, are much, much better than the safe move here. And all you have to do is look a little bit further. All right, so rook dg1, queen c7, not the best square for the queen. The engine said moves like knight to b6 or rook to h8 would be pretty much winning for Black. Not easily winning, but winning with best play. Queen c7, it says if both sides play perfectly, it's 0-0. Doesn't mean it's a dead even position. It means it's an equal position with chances for both sides. h5, and now Black throws the game away. He should play rook fc8. Plays f6. White says, oh, I can win. Also, the engine says White could play knight e6 check, because if Black plays knight takes e6, he could play the Zwischenzug, rook takes g6 check, and that's completely winning. Let's show you that. Knight e6 check, knight takes e6, rook takes g6 check. If he tries to run away, we can play pawn takes check. If he tries to take it back, engine says rook g7, cutting off the king, threatening queen d5 check, mate. A lot of times when you're in these positions, the principle is don't check the king unless you can check him into mate, but cut off his squares and threaten to mate him, and that's going to be even stronger. All right, let's go back. So either move order is winning for White. White decides to do the pseudo queen sack. Black says, uh-oh, I can't take the queen, let me take the knight. But he's lost no matter what. Queen takes. Now, ironically, it's White's attack that's monstrously good. You know, 5 or 6 moves ago, it would have been Black's attack that was monstrously good. And now it's White's attack. It doesn't take much in these volatile positions where opposite side castling and both sides have pieces throwing at the king. Rook f6, pawn takes, rook h8, rook takes, king takes, check, and mate in 4 if he plays it correctly. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Best thing you can do if you enjoyed the video is tell your friends about the channel, Dan Heisman Chess. I appreciate it. You know, find your chess club, send them a little email and say, hey, I just found a great video. If everybody wants to subscribe, Dan Heisman Chess is a great place to learn about chess. I'd appreciate it if you do something like that. If you don't, I still appreciate you watching. You can subscribe, you can like the video. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.